Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another session of the Milo Office Hours Q&A with Rain. My name is Amaris. I am the admin assistant for the LWVC office. I'm also a member of the Milo team, along with Rain Michaels, who we have here on the call. Elizabeth Leslie is our communications manager, who is also a Milo team member, but she will not be joining us today. Before I continue, I just want to have everybody just say hello if you can. I'm going to go down the list and unmute the attendees just to make sure you are attentive and able to use your mic. So, hi, Bruce. Are you there?
Oop.
Hello.
Are you asking?
Hi.
Just saying hello.
Yes, we
just
can
want
hear
to make sure we can hear you. Alrighty. Hi there, Ellen.
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
Hello.
Hi, Hollis.
Hello.
Awesome. And we have Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
Awesome. Okay, well, welcome everybody. So a couple of things about the GoToWebinar functions. We have the questions tab where you can enter in questions privately or send them to all attendees. And there's also the chat function that can be used the same way. You can target one person, just the organizers, or the group as a whole. So these tabs, question and chat tabs, we will be using, especially right now, for you to submit your first initial questions that you've brought to the webinar today. Because what we are going to do is take all of your questions, separate them into different categories based on what the questions are about, and we'll be able to better see if we have any duplicate questions. And throughout the webinar, I'll be posing these back to Rain so that we can see them answered live. So without further ado, I believe that is all I have. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you, Rain.
Okay, great. Okay, well, obviously we need time for some of you to start entering some of the questions that you have. So that being the case, the first thing, while you're typing in questions, the first thing that I want to mention to you is that next week I'm going to be putting some dedicated time into improving the user interface of Milo. As people have been using the system, we've been adding features, and given resources, sometimes we add features and it becomes a little bit confusing as we go along. So we're going to be taking some time that we're just dedicating to looking at the user interface, especially with some of the comments that have been had over time, and making as many improvements as we can with the time that we have next week. And then I'll be continuing the process over the long run as well. So now is a great time for you to comment on things that might be confusing for you. And I hope to get some good feedback on this call. We've gotten a lot of good feedback over the last few months. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Amaris, do we have any specific questions yet, or should we go ahead and open the mic to someone to get started? Oh, I see one just came in.
Questions. Oh, we did just get one. Perfect.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Since it's the only one, I'll go ahead and take it and read it. So it's from Jennifer. Can you put articles on pages besides the home page? If we have different topical articles, we may want to isolate them to other pages. And that's a great question. The answer to that is a combination of yes and no. It can be done, but it can't be done without some kind of intervention from one of us in terms of creating a view. And I forget what league I did it for. Might be San Diego, North County, San Diego. It's an inactive league, so I'll have to log in as an admin to get there. So when you see the user interface as an admin, it's much more dense than what you guys normally see as a full-on admin. But since I'm looking for a non-published site right now, I believe it was, no, you know what, maybe it wasn't for here, maybe it was for a different project, but basically the articles, what we do with the articles and all of the content types is when you're seeing them in a list like this, so for example, on the North County San Diego site, right now you're seeing their articles in a list, including articles to which they're subscribed. And what you're seeing is something called a view. And basically, if you want to have a list of articles that say have a specific tag, then what you should do is just make sure that the article has that tag on it, and then put in a request and say, you know, we have this specific tag, we have these articles with this specific tag, and we would really like them to show up on this specific page. And then, you know, I'll check with Maurice and Elizabeth as to, in regards to what the resources are to make that happen. But as long as you've tagged it consistently, then I can create a view that is isolated to that specific topic that can then be placed onto a specific page. But again, that is more advanced. That's not something that, without creating a really complex user interface, that we can open up to you. So it does require intervention. And what I mean by a specific tag, if you're not entirely sure what I mean by that, when you're working on articles or other types of content, again, you're looking at the full-on administrative interface, because I'm looking at a league that's not public, but you have this tags field right here. And if you start typing something in, it'll actually look for tags that already exist. So, for example, compliance and reform has already been created, which is good because compliance and A&D reform is actually a different tag from compliance ampersand reform. So when you think of what the tags are that you want to create, and you can create whatever tags you want here. You could say that this is green trees if you wanted, and it's not going to create it right now because I'm not going to save this. But you put in what you want here, and as long as you're consistent, if you give us that information, then an isolated view can be created for you and then placed onto a specific page. Are there any questions about that specific request? We can, Maurice, can we go ahead and open up the microphones to see if anyone has any questions about that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody.
Thank you.
So this is Jennifer. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for going through that. So that's great to hear. Where we, in the Chicago group, that's where I'm from, we were wondering on this because, for example, we're looking at ways to have items that we would generate that we might link into what's today a traditional PDF voter newsletter, and how we can start to perhaps transition bit by bit with certain key content that we would write up in article fashion that we can post on the website, but also bring into, for example, to our newsletter page, which might still have, you know, then the link to the full voter, for example.
Right, and that makes perfect sense. I was just checking to see if the voter had already become a tag, and it doesn't look like it has, but that would be an obvious tag that would make sense, and that can be done. Okay. In fact, that right there is a specific use case that I could see other leagues wanting. So if you requested that, we might find a way to make that generic enough that other leagues could also use it.
That would be great.
Okay, thank you for that question, and also the further description of what you're looking for. Let me just make a note here. The other thing that you should be aware of, this is not going to be specific to your league, but anytime you use a tag on your page, if you click on that tag, then you'll come to a listing of all content with that specific tag. So again, that's not specific to your league. That's all content on Milo from all leagues that use that tag, but that is something that you have as well available to you. you can actually kind of direct people to an isolated list of all content of a specific tag. All right, so Amaris, we should probably move on to the next question.
Sorry about that, Rain. I accidentally muted you there.
Okay.
We will move on to the next question. Okay, so Bruce has well, part question, part suggestion. It says, it would be useful if the events interface did not require the entry of a time. And this is useful to help reserve a date if the location and time are not currently known.
Okay, that's a good question because I was pretty sure that time was not required, but it sounds like it is. So let's take a quick look here. Okay, so the way that you would get past that, Bruce, is to say all day when you're creating your event. And then once you do have a time, then you would just uncheck all day and put the actual time in there. And it looks like Bruce might have more to say on that. So I think I can actually unmute you myself. Let me see. Yes, I can. All right, you're unmuted, Bruce.
Okay, yeah, we figured that out already, that all day would work, but unfortunately it says all day on the thing, so people might be scared off by the event, thinking that, oh damn, I'm not going to sit there all day for the thing. So
okay, that's a fair statement. Amaris, I have a list that I'm sort of generating for next week. Let me just add a note here to say whether or not in the design changes we should investigate removing the word all day.
No, I think it's okay within the context you intended to use it, but and the misuse that you were just suggesting, it didn't seem to work.
Mm-hmm.
But where this came up is our annual meeting was going to be in June or something like that, and we haven't found a location yet, but we wanted everybody to reserve the date, as it were.
Okay, so kind of create some kind of a middle, that's actually, so with dates and times, that functionality is extremely complicated. So what you're asking could be a pretty big request.
Are you sorting on time when you is it that the problem? Are you sorting on time as well as date when you arrange things?
Yes, and then there's also the functionality where it can be added to a calendar, so it needs to know how to handle that. There's a lot of factors involved.
So maybe you need to do something the equivalent of that all day button, but it says time's not known or something like that.
Right.
So add the 3 buttons there instead of 2 buttons.
All right, well, we will investigate that.
Okay.
All right.
And I had a second question, which she can either read or I can read off as well. But this has to do with, I noticed when I was converting the pages over from the Lou site that we had some images that were stored on our own Lou site, and I've moved those over to the Google Drive. But the Google Drive, when you try to link an image in with the reference to the way they use that kind of long encrypted kind of a name, that the
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
they seem to have other noise in the background there. But anyway, that long name like that doesn't seem to provide enough information in the kind of like the HTML image statement that's being used for it to recognize what kind of image it is, whether it's a PNG or a JPEG or a GIF, and so it seems to not work. At least in this context. So is there a way of either giving it extra information to tell, hey, what kind of file it is, or what?
For images, is there a reason why you're not uploading the images to your site, why you're putting them on Google Drive?
Okay, if you remember a previous one of these office hours we had, I pointed out the kind of like schizophrenic way we have in the documentation about it. Says, well, you can copy all the things over to our site, but please don't do it if it's a lot of files that are like that are not, you don't really want to share to everybody else.
So that's right. That's kind of a in the web world, the discussion about files was about things like PDFs or docs or actual documents. Images that are meant to display on the page are a different type of entity when you're thinking about how a page displays. They are separate files from the website itself, and in fact, in a content management system like this, there aren't even actually HTML files because everything is being pulled dynamically from a database. But images are instances that need to be referenced, and so for those, you would actually want to put them into the Milo system and use the media forms so that you have all of the appropriate metadata to go with those images. The discussion of large numbers of files was in relation to things like hundreds of PDFs of voter newsletters and so forth. So that's in terms of displaying an instance of an image, you'll want to actually put that into your Milo site.
Yeah, I kind of figured as much, but I was wondering if you knew a way to get around the apparent problem we had there.
It's Google. It's the Google files are meant more as I know it seems strange to not think of images as files in this context, but they're more meant to be a file management tool as opposed to an image presentation tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an illusion anyway. When you give an href link to a PDF file on the Google like that, it really triggers an engine on their side which displays the PDF kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Those are my two questions.
Okay, great. All right, so it looks like those are all the questions that are up right now. So unless, Maurice, you know of something else, we can open it up and see if someone else wants to ask a question.
I see that Ellen has had her hand raised for quite a bit here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Ellen, and see if you have a question for us.
Yeah, it was just back when you said when you use a tag on your page, clicking on it will take you to a list with all other leagues, Milo references to that tag. If you just want your own, is there a way to sort to find your own?
Well, that's a really nice recommendation that we could actually create a filter at the top of all of, as I said earlier, those are all views. So we could create a view at the top, sorry, not a view, a filter at the top that allows people to choose a specific league.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah.
That's a great suggestion. Let me add it to the list that I'm generating here. Add filter to the top of term pages to allow people to filter to a specific league. Okay,
Thanks.
that's a great suggestion. Thank you. All right, I see something else that's just come in from Jennifer, which is, that would be very helpful. Okay, great. So a +1 for that request. All right, who would like to ask the next question?
I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so that you all have a chance to speak up if you have a question now.
This is Bruce with just a quick comment. It sounds like you have your microphone either on a table where your keyboard is or something like that, but when you type to make those notes, it's really clicking pretty loud on our speakers and stuff.
Oh, I think that was me. Sorry.
Thank you.
All right.
You can unmute me if you want, and I'll raise my hand.
Okay, well, I see that Jennifer has submitted some questions through the question tab. So it says, we are trying to plan for our cutover. What is the general process for coordinating that effort with the Milo team? So Jennifer, are you referring to the go live process?
Exactly, yeah. Sorry, I'm an implementation person, so we always call it cutover. So yes, just looking for what type of how do we take our website live? And I still actually do, I've posted in our Google group before, and still I'm not quite sure what I need to do on our domain as far as switching from the Lou forwarding of emails to the domain handling the forwarding of emails. But just in general, trying to figure out, well, when we say, hey, we're ready to go live, what is that process?
Okay, so we do have documentation first off, where we explain what it takes to point your vanity URL to your new site. It will be a little different for depending on your domain name registrar. The steps may be a little different, but as far as
And
the order, go ahead, Rain.
Let me jump in on that one. I think Amaris is better suited to answer the big picture of your question, Jennifer. So I'm going to let her finish that, but I do want to jump in on the specifics of what she just said. When you're ready to point your URL to Milo, there are two ways that you can do it, as she mentioned. And if you're with Network Solutions, then there's actually really only one way, unless you want to spend money. But if you're with any other registrar, there's two. One of them is the easy way, but the less ideal way, which is a 301 redirect, or some registrars will call it forwarding, others will call it a 301 redirect, but the technical term for it is a 301 redirect, where you basically just say to the registrar, if the user happens to type in this URL, then redirect them to the Milo URL. And that's really easy to do. Most registrars have that forwarding. You know, you just log in right there, and it'll say forward this URL or 301 redirect on this URL, and you just enter the path in there, and you're done. The much more complicated way that you're probably going to need some assistance if you don't have a tech person who's comfortable with DNS, then you're probably going to want some assistance from your registrar, is something called a rewrite rule, where you create an A-name record. Again, this is very technical. Don't worry too much about remembering these. Just remember, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if it sounds like a foreign language, then you're going to want the registrar's tech support to help you through this. But basically, you're creating an A-name record that points your URL to our server. And then on our side, before you make that change, we need to have set up a rewrite rule that says if somebody hits our server with this path, then switch it, rewrite it to this path. And the reason why it's the more complicated way, it's a little bit scarier, but it's the better way, because what that means is that not only will it capture people coming to your vanity URL, but it'll also capture people coming to subpaths of your vanity URL. So for example, if you had lwvjennifer.org/calendar, then it would actually rewrite to my.lwv.org/Jennifer/calendar. So you would actually maintain as much of those structures as possible. So that's something to keep in mind when you look at the documentation and you work with Amaris on the steps to actually go live, is which one of, if you're comfortable going through the more complicated methods, knowing that it's the better approach, versus whether or not you just kind of want to do the easy approach that will at least get people to the right place.
Awesome, thanks, Rain.
And I'll let you finish, Amaris. Sorry.
Just a little bit about the steps to take before reaching the step of pointing your vanity URL, as Rain was talking about. These are a little bit specific to Lou users, but it would work similar to anybody moving over to Milo. So the first step would be to notify Lou support and Lou billing of your cancellation, and this would be by email. If you need these email addresses or some more detail on notifying the Lou people, you can email us at milo@lwvc.org, and we can share some more detailed instructions on that and to share the contact with you. The second step would be to go live or set your Milo site to public. And then the third final step would be to begin the pointing of your vanity URL.
And since we have currently the branded emails on Lou, which also our domain provider in theory is supposed to give us, they've walked us through how to set it up, but like if I right now today on the domain provider set up, test@lwvchicago.org as an email, those actually aren't routing to forwarding as they are telling me, but I'm not sure if that's because today everything is routing through Lou. So I've unfortunately not been able to, even though the domain provider is saying, yes, we can give you a similar forwarding service that we have today with Lou, where the branded one goes to a personal account. I haven't been able to test that. So I'm not 100% sure what steps I need to do, if there's anything I need to coordinate with the Lou individuals or with the Milo team to at least make sure that whatever I set on the domain provider will actually do that routing.
So what that probably means is that your entire domain, including what's called an MX record, your mail record, is pointing over to LWVNet right now. So when you change that, you'll want to connect with your registrar to make sure that your MX record, that's M as in Mary, X as in, I don't know, xylophone. Does xylophone start with an X? And that record will then need to point to your registrar, not where you set up the forwarding, as opposed to LWVNet. But it sounds like right now that MX record is actually pointing to LWVNet.
Okay, so in theory, I should be able to log in on my domain provider right now and check where their MX, and if I see that it says it's pointing to LWVNet, I can say, aha, that's it, and now I know what to do at the cutover.
Yes, in theory. Unfortunately, dealing with DNS is never exactly simple. So it's going to be a bunch of numbers, and you would need to know what those numbers are. So I'm making an assumption here that this isn't something that you're expert in. If you are, then great. It will actually be pretty simple. But if you're not,
unfortunately, I'm not. There really isn't anyone in our organization who is. So this is the one piece we're struggling with a bit to get ourselves ready to cut over.
This is something that your registrar should help you with. I know a lot of times registrars don't give a lot of support, but this is something that's very specific to the registrar. So they should help. This is something that they should actually give their support time to you on.
Okay, well, at least you've given me some better language to communicate with them, so thank you.
That's good.
Hi, this is Bruce. I'd like to make a comment about this as well. You hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You may have seen on the Google site, I asked a related question yesterday about this and we've been thinking about what it takes. And there's another thing that you hadn't mentioned is that both the state and federal sites have links to our sites. So when they find this, and you need to contact them to update those as well. The Google Domains is what we're using for our vanity site, and it's pretty transparent about how to do all this kind of stuff. It doesn't require knowledge of any of the details of how to make this work, and it's pretty cheap, only $12 a year.
Thank you for both of those notes. Google Domains does make things a lot easier. GoDaddy is one of the easier ones. Unfortunately, if you're registered, you already have your domain registered, and transferring a domain registration, as recently got to discover, can get kind of hairy. So once you're with a registrar, you're kind of with that registrar. But if you're starting from scratch and you're setting up your vanity URL right now, then Google Domains is a good choice because, as Bruce just mentioned, it's very transparent. GoDaddy keeps things pretty simple. Those are probably the two where it'd be like, okay, your life's going to be a bit easier with these tools. And then also Bruce's point that your state league and the National League have links pointing to your domain is a really important one. Amaris, I'm making a note in my list right here to make sure that we add that to our documentation and our steps if it's not in there already.
Yeah, and another
But
related
with the
comment.
forwarding, it should work, right? I mean, with the forwarding, if they've got the link of the lwvchicago.org, which is our main.
Well, if the National League is linking to lwvnet.org instead of your right, because you have both your Vanity one and then
Right,
you also
got
have
it.
the LWVnet, and a lot of times the National League is linking to the LWVnet one, not your Vanity one, and that's where when you move from LWVnet, it might break because I don't know what the Lou team is able to set up in terms of redirects on their side.
Yeah, that was just the
But
question
it would
I
be
was
the
going to.
Lou people that would manage that at the national level?
Yeah.
Sorry, Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. When in our case that we haven't paid beyond March 15th, so they're just going to shut our Lou site down. So that was our target for switchover. But the question, but I haven't asked them explicitly is can they do can they leave a redirect around there that'll send to the new site, or they give a 404 error message, or what?
Yeah, they might. They might be able to do that. That's a Carol question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I guess that's. I had another thought related to that, but it hasn't occurred to me at the moment. Anyway, it's just a little bit of an issue, and also since we live in the Bay Area, so we have a number of local sites that are neighbors of us, and I'm going to send an email to all of them, be sure they update any references they have to us on their sites. Right. Oh yeah, and then the other thing is the which I made a comment in that email that I sent. This presents a little bit of a contact problem for the state and federal people if they want to get a hold of our webmasters. And previously, they could just send it to WM at your local thing at lwvnet.org, and they knew exactly what that was because that was wired into Lou. You don't have a similar thing for Milo. So are you keeping a database now of webmaster contact information?
Maurice, I know you have an extensive contact document. Do you want to answer that question?
Yes, this is something that we have been recording as we have been acquiring the new Milo customers. So we are slowly building our database as the leaks come in.
And so the wired into the Milo system was also they had a contact for president and info and a couple things like that. So you're going to keep a similar list for those as well.
So to that point, Bruce, the problem is that while it seems like there was a built-in way to make sure that there was a known list, it depended on whether or not the email addresses to which those addresses were forwarding were actually legitimate email addresses. And over the years, there were many cases where those addresses were abandoned without the Lou team knowing that forwarding wasn't actually working anymore. So it wasn't necessarily as straightforward as you think it, as it seems like it should have been. And to your point, it should have been pretty straightforward, but it still depended on the same thing that the current system depends on, which is that the leagues keep their contacts up to date.
So one solution to that problem is to ping each one of those addresses yearly like that and see if they're still working. Are you going to do that with your new contact list or something to keep you sure it's kept up to date?
That step may be something that we would be doing when we send out just correspondence. It would be a step that we would take possibly yearly, but this would be something to discuss with the rest of the Milo team. But that is a great suggestion, Bruce, because then that will allow us to take a step to update for each year of turnover.
So, and one way you could enforce that a little bit is to, if they don't respond within a week or whatever time limit you want like that, you could make some message that would appear on their site when people access it that would give them a hint. Hey, you're not responding to us.
Yeah, we can do that. That's funny and clever.
Thanks, Bruce.
Okay. All right. Are there other questions?
This is Jennifer Jennifer again. You had made a comment about when we were talking about the calendars, about the events linking to calendar, and we are actually planning to have our events and then also maintain a Google Calendar for things like committees. Is there some delivered integration, or when you were referencing calendar versus event, what integration were you referring to?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I was going to go to Chicago, but it looks like that's not currently active. So what we have right now with calendar integration, so to speak, and this probably won't show up because this is a past event, but I'll just edit this event and make it a future event. Yeah, it's a past event, so it doesn't have it anymore. But when you go to an event that is in the future, such as in 2018, let's just make it a range for fun, and then go straight to publish. Okay, so when you go to an event that's in the future, you have this add to calendar tool, which then you can click on one of these and have it add the event directly to your calendar. So this is a personal tool that individuals who are looking at your site have access to. So, if I'm super excited about coming to demo event, then I would add it to my calendar with this link, and then I don't have to put the information in myself. It's just added right there for me. So that's what the integration is. It's not a Google Calendar integration. There are definitely ways that you can use your RSS feed, for example, or we can work with you to create other types of feeds that you can then use to have have your Google Calendar automatically update with any events that you add to your site. Those are things that would have to be done, that would be specific and customized for your league. So it would be a conversation with the Milo team as far as what that meant resource-wise.
Okay, well, it's good to know that that's an option.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm not sure is really obvious here, but everything in Milo is little tiny chunks of information. So if you can kind of think of a logic about content, if you can say, like, there's all of these action alerts that are related to leagues from the West Coast that are within this time range, and I really want to send them to X organization as a grouping of data, and pretty much anything that you can kind of logically think of a set of filters that would narrow you down to that. It is possible to create some kind of communication exchange. It takes time. It takes somebody like me sitting down and actually building, to use more technical terms, what are called queries into the database to say, give me all of the content that follows these specific queries. So over the long run, when you're thinking about how you want to use your site, or ways that the system could be improved for not just you, but all of the leagues using Milo, if it occurs to you that a grouping of content of a specific type under specific parameters would really make sense under certain conditions, definitely recommend those kinds of things, or start the conversation about those kinds of things, because that's how Milo is designed. It's designed to be able to really move that data in any way. It's just, it's not something that you can just click a couple buttons and make happen, because building that kind of functionality would take millions of dollars. So somebody has to sit down and write those queries.
Okay.
Hopefully that's helpful information. All right, any other questions?
This is Jenny. I can keep going, but I'm trying to pause to let others on the call.
Keep going.
So this one is perhaps maybe a general comment. I really do like the interface, but it does seem, for example, if I create content like an article on the website and I can do the share where I can basically do a push out to Facebook or Twitter or wherever. I'm just curious, have you gotten feedback from the sites that are live? Right now we're really decentralized in Chicago, so it would be great to have that you write it once and you share it out. But my challenge is, how many people then do I have to train to do Milo when they're maybe comfortable, for example, doing a post on Facebook, for example. But and so I'm just curious, because it's a great feature, but at the same time, it means I have to train more administrators or encourage people to become administrators of our site. So I was just kind of curious if you've had feedback or any success stories where I can use that as a recruitment tool for our team.
Yeah, so I don't know that we have any stories yet because it's so new. I think Texas might be using this a fair amount. Somebody is, but first of all, this is some documentation that I really need to prepare because for some people, sharing does seem to be a little bit more complex. I know that there are some league webmasters who just, Facebook and Twitter just aren't, they're not their thing. So I totally get that. So there's a bit of a documentation need that's still lacking and we still need to make happen. But then there are a couple of ways that you can kind of manage the sharing. First of all, Facebook does have ways that it can ingest feeds. There used to be actually a lot of great ways, and it seems like they're clamping down on that. So right now, I'm not actually sure what the best way to ingest a feed into Facebook is, because the ones that I have used for years have all gone away, and I think that's because of intellectual privacy and content rules that are new, that are coming up to prevent IP theft. But that is something that has been doable for a long time. In terms of the actual manual process, so if your content is set up correctly, then whenever somebody, so if one of your league volunteers, for example, was like, okay, I'm working with the league and I'm an admin on their Facebook page. So I can just go to this piece of content and click share and then post to Facebook as that specific admin. So, because I'm an admin, I have a lot of options as to how I can share something. What it's going to do is it's going to pull the title, it's going to pull the summary, and you're not seeing this here, but it's also going to pull the main image as long as the main image is large enough. And the main image, if it doesn't look awful, if it doesn't look pixelated, then it will be large enough, because we allow you to put in smaller images if you want to give you that flexibility, but typically you'll see it right away, it'll look bad, and then you put in larger images. So it'll take this image by default, and then that's what will be there, and then you'll have the link. And then, of course, you can have your own separate post. So there is that way to very quickly just move content over to Facebook if you're an admin on a specific Facebook page, and you don't even have to have access to the site itself or be an admin on the site. But let me leave this because I don't actually want to post this. But you do have even greater control. That's not, I would like to find ways to make this easier. I'm definitely going to be documenting it, hopefully really soon. It's not exactly easy because there's so much that you have available, but it's all under meta tags. So there's the basic information that we've set up by default. So we've basically said by default in that description field, throw the summary, which is coming from up here in your body. The summary will be the beginning. Oh, sorry, I actually broke it out. I was going to show you how you could break it out, but I already broke it out. So if you haven't broken the summary out, you'll see body and then you'll see edit summary. And what it'll do is it'll take the first certain number of characters from your post. This can look kind of ugly if the beginning of your post is something like an image or a link to a PDF or something else that's highly formatted. So what you can do is you can edit summary, and then you separate out a summary, and you can put in plain text whatever you want in here. It doesn't have to be the same words that are from the beginning of your post. It can be something separate. So by default, that's what it's taking. It's taking for the description, it's taking the summary. And under here, you've got Open Graph. And this is a lot of what the various social sites actually use. It says, okay, it's taking the title, it's taking the body, it's taking field image, and this is that image that's up here in the main image field. So it's taking that by default. All of this can be overridden on a content by content basis. So if you wanted to use a different image for this specific site, and again, this is much more advanced, and somebody would have to be taught this, or the documentation has to be really good, and that is something that I do need to work on. But you know, I could say, let's just let's go to Flickr here, or let's go to well, let's just see what comes up if we put in my name, if we can get an image of me. Here we go. I don't know where this is from. Oh, it's from LinkedIn. That works. So if I copy this image address, I can then put that image right here, and it's a crazy image because it's coming from LinkedIn. But now Facebook or Pinterest or whatever would actually use this URL instead of the image that is set up to happen by default. So you can really start to customize all of this in terms of the data that you put in here. When I create the documentation, and hopefully I'll have some time when I start doing some UI improvements, I can kind of focus you in on the ones that really matter and hopefully improve the help text. And then the documentation itself will also help as well. So that's a lot of control that you have. If your people that you have going in and sharing things are happy with what's there by default, then great. And if they're not, then either you can make adjustments or they can make adjustments. And then you also have in this whole meta tags area under the basic tags, you also have the ability to put in custom information about specific content as well, and you have the ability to indicate whether or not search engines should be accessing it. So there's a lot of, this isn't just social sharing. This box here isn't just social sharing. This is like your SEO toolbox, and it's pretty all-inclusive. It's got a lot of stuff in it. So we turned it all on because we figured people might want to use it, but unfortunately turning it all on also means it can be kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, I think we're going to definitely be baby steps first. But one thing, so what the light bulb that went off is that, so if I'm the web administrator and I'm loading a content article and publish it on our website, I may or may not be the Facebook or Twitter administrator for our league, but either if, Facebook, it's easier with the sharing. I haven't found on Twitter, as easy, but anyway, but what could happen is once that's published, one of our members who is a Facebook or Twitter administrator would be able to, just as an end user of the website, I'm assuming the share button is there, and they could use the share button and with their access as administrator post to those accounts, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Okay, great. I
have a related question, the light bulb, as it were, that came off when you were talking about this. What I thought I heard when people came back from some of your initial presentations about Milo, which I didn't go to, it sounded like there was going to be a set of administrative attributes that could be given to different users and it looks like we only have one of those. You're either an administrator or you're not. But here's an example where something like that might work. That person who was the Facebook administrator could have been given access to one particular page that was related to the Facebook kind of stuff, so they could update the things on this site, but nothing else.
Yes. So the answer to your question is that functionality is possible. That functionality has not yet been built because there were other features that were prioritized, and we didn't have a lot of input yet as to what other levels of access people might want. So if you have thoughts as you're working with your league and your site about what kinds of different levels of access might be useful, please note them and recommend them and start that conversation. And right now, to your point, we can already make a note and say that it might actually be worthwhile to have a user role specifically for social sharing, and so that there can be league volunteers who only have access to those tools and don't have to worry about the rest of the interface.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the internals of your system work, but it seemed like one way that would be simplest would be to have administrative controls on a page-by-page basis for like that. That way, they'd have all kinds of power to do bad things, but it couldn't go very far.
That's an option as well. So that would be, Bruce, if you wanted to start that conversation on the Google group and start eliciting feedback from webmasters, that would be really great, because that is functionality that in the long run could potentially be very useful to leagues, and knowing what those types of controls might be that would make sense would be helpful to us. Yeah, every league has its own dynamics because it has its own volunteers with their varying levels of expertise in different fields. So creating something that works for everyone, it requires more of a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we have some group that are using Constant Contact, and I could imagine that they might want to have control of one page that to interact with that kind of stuff.
Right. That makes sense. All right. Any other questions? We have 6 minutes left.
I have one on action alerts, actually. This is Jennifer once again. So kind of related to that, again, with the RSS feeds. Today, our process is that our action alerts more likely would come out of an email being processed first versus through MailChimp versus someone going to our website to publish one and then send it out. So what I have set up on the Chicago site as a workaround, since it didn't seem like I could use the delivered action alert page. It seemed like the action alert page really intended that I was going to actually key it and then someone could subscribe to my feed, but not the reverse. So what I did was created an article that is actually reading an archive document from MailChimp, which then it really just displays a link that would take you at least to what our latest action alert was. But that's kind of the workaround I've determined for us to do, at least right now, since, as I said, our process right now today is more likely that the email would get sent out by the various people within our communications team. It'd be more likely, just given the number of resources who have access to doing email versus the resources that have access to the website. And I just wanted to see if I'm missing something in the delivered action alert where that should be possible to pull in. But otherwise, it seemed like I couldn't use the delivered action alert page.
Right. So it would be, it would definitely be a customization. So you would want to talk with the Milo team if this was something that you were interested in. But it would be possible to set it up so that there would be some method by which those action alerts would come into your site automatically. If you're able to have someone create the associated node, and these are every page on your site, as I mentioned, there's no actual HTML files. It's all content in the database. It's all kind of data entry and data tables. So what you see as a page, is the technical term for that, is actually a node. So if somebody could actually come in and create a specific piece of content that is an action alert on your site, the nice thing about that is that then it has all the relations, people can relate to it. And there is a field on the action alert, a join the conversation direct link, or you can also use a further information link. And if you use either of these, then it will put that, it won't like bring that content from that page into the page as an iframe or anything, but it will then create a link to that delivered page that is from MailChimp if you wanted to do that as well, which might have more content on it as well.
Okay, I will play around with that link at least then. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Bruce again. I got another question. One of these office sessions we had, you mentioned that this one of those buttons called conditionals. And I have a use for something like that. And I want to know if it's something within its scope, even though you haven't written the documentation for it yet.
So conditionals are in web form. Is that within the use that you're thinking of?
Well, let me explain the use.
Okay, go ahead.
In our current Loo system like that, every time we have the renewal coming around in September, we do that during 1 month period, and during that period we turn on a page we don't normally have on that has all the links for doing PayPal and stuff to do the renew, and also in some of the other pages we change some of the comments to say if you want to do renew, go to here, kind of things like that. And what right now we've been able to do is just use that comment capability with the double square brackets in some cases to leave the pages still there, but comment things out and uncomment them. So could all that stuff been done instead with conditional by setting some variable that would trigger the conditional for, okay, it's the right month, turn this on or whatever?
No, what you're talking about, no. The conditionals that I mentioned were in web form. So what that means is when you're setting up your web form, you might have certain fields that only appear depending on the answer that is given in a previous field. So for example, if you're asking, if you decide to have your join and renew page form as one page, then if somebody's saying join for the first time, you might be asking different questions than if somebody's saying renew an existing membership. So then they would answer that.
It wasn't something explicitly appeared as sort of an algebraic statement in the documentation area so that you could turn some things on or not or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's not part of like the WYSIWYG or something like that. It's specifically a conditional for the forms and the questions that are being asked within the forms and when they display or when they might be required versus not required.
Okay.
So regarding what you're talking about, what I mean, you did make that comment, and we have it in our notes of features to make it easier to kind of comment content out in here. And what I might end up doing actually is creating a style in here that basically says don't display. That would then comment content out for a while. That's something that we do have on the list based on the feedback that we've already gotten from you. The other option that you have right now is that you can unpublish content that you don't want, but just keep it around. So if I go to manage all of my content, I can take a specific piece of content, let's say this voting page right here. If I highlight that one, and right now under this line here it says published, and published is yes. But I can go ahead and by checking on it here under operations, I can choose unpublish, and then if I execute that, it's going to take a moment to do this, and then now the voting page is no longer published. So it's still here, it's still in my list of content, but it won't appear in a menu, and it won't be accessible because it's not published, it's not public.
Is that different than just unlinking it from the side menu?
yes, the difference is access. If it's not published, only an administrator will ever see it. But if you unlink it from the menu, then if somebody has the direct URL to it, then they could still get to
Yeah,
it.
right. Okay. Yeah, we had that same problem. I had to make I did roughly the same thing in Loo, but I renamed the page and put another dummy page in there. So if they had the link, they would get the other page saying it's not time to renew yet, right?
Right, right.
Okay, but anyway, you might let that problem rattle around in the back of your brain. Maybe there's another kind of conditional thing we could eventually have.
Yeah, yeah, that is in our list because you did make that request, and we can definitely see that might be a request other leagues are going to be making. So that is definitely something that we have in our list. It may seem like it all goes into
Black hole.
a vacuum. It may seem that way, but believe me, it doesn't. I hope that somewhat reassures you, and the fact that I remember that you made that request and can actually tell you that it is in our list, hopefully that assures you that it's not going into a black hole. It's just we're three people with a lot going on. So
that's why I think I made a suggestion related to that is that it might be useful to have a published list of things that you're thinking of doing or people have added, so people could look at it and say, oh, it's a good idea, so they don't pummel you with a similar question all the time on them. Maybe they could even kind of vote on it and say, we like this more or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I'll add it to the list of things to do. But yes, no, that is a great recommendation. And since I am going to be spending a lot of dedicated time next week, that may be one of the first things to put together so that people can see that. All right, Amaris, it's in your hands now.
All right. Well, if anybody were to have any last questions that they felt they weren't able to fit in to today's webinar, you can always reach out to us through our Milo support email. You can send emails to milo@lwvc.org, and there you can also send us any questions you may have about billing or things like that. So we really appreciate you guys attending today. I hope that many of your questions were answered, that you are leaving today more informed and well-trained to continue the great work on your Milo sites. Rain, did you have any last words to close out the webinar?
No, just that we're continuing to work on improving this. So the feedback that you're giving us is very useful. And if you have any recommendations, please feel free to post them. If it's not the end of the world, let us know that so that we're not scrambling. But all of the recommendations are very helpful. We're so close to this that sometimes there's something simple that we just don't see, and your feedback makes a big difference.
Right.
Just a quickie there. You would use the word sometimes that we're going to do seaming sometime, like maybe at the end, you're going to make it look prettier or something like that. When is that happening, and what kind of prettiness is being added, as it were?
All right, so there's kind of two layers to that. There's just the user interface, which is what I'm focusing on next week, which is just cleaning up things that kind of get confusing. One of the good examples of functionality that we added very late in the game, after most of you were already setting up your sites. Let's see, I have to be in a league that I am actually a user of. Here we go. So if, for example, you create a page or any other type of content, one thing that's kind of messy because it was added so late in the game is you're looking at the body, and then there's all this kind of help text that's actually probably more confusing than helpful. There's this drop down that's more confusing than helpful. And then there's these buttons here that, just because there's such density of information, it's really unclear immediately without kind of sitting and paying attention what these buttons actually mean. So that kind of usability is what I'm going to be focusing on next week, to just try to clean up the detritus that is there, because we are using an open source tool with a lot of contributed modules, and a lot of what you see is out of the box, and it's not necessarily designed for ease of use as much as just making sure that the functionality is there. That's one layer of it. The other layer is the actual design. So because this is a database-driven site, as a content management site, the design itself, the visual itself, the way that the menu looks, whether the menu's on the left versus on the top, that's all basically just a skin. And so we can change that skin at any time, and it will affect everything immediately without you having to do anything from a content or structure perspective, and then everything will just change. So the conversation will be happening, and I don't know if Amrit, you or I are really equipped to talk about exactly how it's going to happen, but there's already been a fair amount of discussion about how the National League has put out a website that has a new look that is very different from the look off of which this was built initially. There's kind of new branding guidelines or recommendations that are coming out. And then there's also the fact that Milo was built to look, the initial skin for it was specifically built to not be too jarringly different from Loo, since a lot of people were going to be moving from Loo to Milo and wanted to think more about getting into the new system and less about having to kind of rethink the entire look of their site. So the left menu, all of the gray bar at the top, these are all elements that match what's on Loo to some degree. So over the long run, we are going to be having conversations with League webmasters about the future design of Milo. And as those design changes come out, you'll see the look continue to modernize, because it's been set up in a way where that look is literally just a skin, and we can just, or that a skin's probably not the right term, because you don't just take off your skin and put on new skin. It's a layer of clothing that we can, like, we can take off a sweater and put on another sweater, or we can actually change the entire outfit. And that's what that means. But that's going to be a conversation that's going to happen with you over time. And I believe, Amrit, is this correct, that Melissa and Elizabeth are working on setting up the start of that conversation for later in March or the beginning of April?
Yes, I believe that conversation is happening with the National League either this week or next week.
Okay, great.
All right.
So,
well, if no one has any other questions, thank you once again for all of your questions and for joining us today. You will always catch us in the Google group and on the support tickets if you ever need us. So thank you guys very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
thank you.
Thanks.